Hello, scholars. This week we're going to be learning about a really cool type of art called op art. And the op in op art is actually short for optical illusions. That's right, this week we're going to be learning about a style of art, and we're going to learn how to create art that can actually trick people's brains by tricking their eyes. So there's a little bit of science and a little bit of art in this week's lesson. I think you're really going to like it. So let's take a look at what that optical illusion art really is. So take a look at this wild image. Now you can tell that this is just a picture I pulled from the internet, but look at these wavy kind of lines. And if you kind of rotate your head back and forth, or even as you're looking at this on the screen, those black and white lines seem to be wiggling. You can almost see some areas that look gray, even though it's not really gray. Now, what this is an example of op art, optical illusion art. Now, back in the 1950s and 1960s, artists, a lot of them were experimenting with a type of art called abstract art or minimalist art, where they were using less colors and less defined shapes and really just kind of making art made of lines and very simple shapes, usually hard edge shapes like squares and rectangles. Maybe you've seen pictures of those kinds of art and kind of wondered, like, why would artists just work with simple colors and simple lines and simple shapes? Well, as they were experimenting with them, artists began to notice that certain things happened when you put opposite colors next to each other, colors like black and white, or even different kinds of colors called complementary colors, which are opposite on the color wheel. In art class, we learned about adjacent colors, colors that are very similar, like yellow and green or red and purple. But when we put opposite colors next to each other, especially with patterned lines or repeated images, something really interesting happens inside of our brain. Our brain can't figure out those spaces in between the colors, so our brain kind of takes some shortcuts and causes that wiggling, moving effect. Now, one of the cool things about op art is as artists were experimenting with this, scientists looked at their art, and scientists couldn't really understand why their eyes were doing that too. So in this instance, art actually influenced some scientific discoveries that came in the 1960s about how our eyes and our brains work together to create images. So on this page, we can see two different optical illusions, two different kinds of op art. On the right is an image that uses just black and white to give it kind of a wiggling or vibrating sensation. In this picture on the left, this circular one here, you can see a lot of yellows and purples. And yellow and purple are actually complementary colors, which kind of makes this whole image seems like it's vibrating back and forth, even though it's just a bunch of lines, colors, and shapes. So to help explain how the science of this works, we're going to check out a very quick video that gets into the actual science behind optical illusions work. After that, I'm going to show you how to make your own optical illusion art, your own op art, using just a pencil, a marker, and a piece of paper.
Inside Science TV.
These are just two identical run-of-the-mill straight lines. Nothing all that terribly interesting about them. But what is interesting is what happens when you change what's going on around them. They'll look like they've changed size in relation to each other. They'll change to different shades. They'll stretch and compress, and can even change directions. Even though it seems like these changes are actually happening on the screen, the only thing that's actually bending and buckling is your mind. What's going on inside your brain is the truly mesmerizing part of visual illusions. When you look at something, what you're really seeing is light, specifically light from the sun, or a light bulb bounces off whatever you're looking at and enters into your eye. The light is then converted to electrical signals that your brain can turn into an image. This process takes about 1/10 of a second, so at any given moment, your eyes are taking in an incredible amount of information. It's really difficult for your brain to try to focus on everything at once, so our brain takes shortcuts, simplifying what we see to help us concentrate on what's important. This trait helped early humans survive encounters with fast predators, or at the very least, avoid running into trees. These shortcuts are also at the heart of how visual illusions fool our brains. Take the herring illusion, for example. Here are two straight lines again, but when you drop them in front of this radial pattern, they looked warped even though they're actually straight. When your brain sees that radial pattern, it focuses on the point in the middle. It looks like you're traveling towards it. Your brain then thinks these parallel lines are getting closer. That's why they seem to get larger as you approach the center of the radial pattern, and that makes the lines look warped. Not all visual illusions trick our brain into seeing motion. Some can also trick our brains into perceiving colors or shades that aren't actually there. Take the mock band illusion. This stack of ascending gray bars seems to be lighter on the bottom, but when we separate them, we can see that they're all a solid color. This is due to an automatic process in our brains called lateral inhibition that helps us define the edges of objects. The effect can be seen in this famous illusion, the Hermann grid, where you can see a sort of gray circle at the intersection points of each square. What about those illusions that make it seem like a still image is moving? The psychedelic peripheral drift illusion is an impressive brain fart. This is a version called the rotating snakes. You can't help but see a very convincing slithering motion within the image, but when you fixate on any point, the motion seems to stop. This is due in part to how we perceive light and dark, and in part to our eye movements. The sequence of light, dark, and colored segments in each of these snakes tricks the motion-sensitive neurons in your brain into responding as they would to real physical motion. The pattern of segments that leads to the illusory rotation is always white, light gray, black, and dark gray in sequence. In color, the lime green acts as light gray, and the light blue acts as dark gray. So you can see it also works in grayscale. Also, blinking, shifting your eyes, and looking away can fuel the illusion of motion. So believe the cliche, what you see isn't always what you get. Speaking of things we're seeing, hit that subscribe button to see more Inside Science videos. So to let us know if you want more, give us a like. Do you have any other burning questions you want explained? Let us know in the comments.
All right, so I hope that helped to explain some of the science behind why just these colors, shapes, and lines kind of wiggle our eyes so much and mess with our brains a little bit. So what we're going to be doing today is I'm actually going to show you two different types of optical illusions. The first one is going to look kind of like this. This is a very simple type of optical illusion where you can make a three-dimensional shape kind of seem like it's popping up off your page. After that, we're going to try out one that's a little bit more complex and will require a little bit more work on your part. If you'd like to do both, that's fantastic. If you want to try just one and then maybe attempt the other later on, that's fine too. But stay tuned and let's see how we can do these with some pencil, paper, and a black marker you might have in your house.
All right, so let's take a look at how we can create our own op art in a really, really simple way. So what you need for this is just a pencil, piece of paper. Ideally, that means the best case scenario means you would have a black marker as well. That'll really help your black and whites pop so that you really have opposite colors. If you don't have a marker around, you can do it with a pencil. Just make sure you're coloring really dark. So the first thing I want to do is somewhere on my paper, I can do it right in the middle, you can do it off to the side a little bit, just draw yourself a nice big circle. Now eventually we're going to cause this circle to appear to be three-dimensional round shape called a sphere. But I'm just going to start out with a circle like that. Now, this is a pretty good freehand circle. Now, if you don't have the ability to draw a really nice circle, that's okay. It doesn't have to be perfect. Or, if you want to cheat a little bit, it's not really cheating, utilize something round you have around your house. I'm enjoying a cup of coffee while I'm doing this, so if I want to, I could set my coffee mug here, and I could trace around the outside edge of that. If I don't want to draw that circle, what we call freehand, that means without any other kind of tools, I can just trace the bottom of that. And now I have a really nice circle here. I would say pretty much a perfect circle because I traced around the bottom of that coffee mug. I'm just going to make it a little darker so you guys can see that on the screen. I'm going to take a quick sip and back to work. So the first thing we're going to do after this is we're going to draw a series of straight lines all the way through the negative space of our paper. That means we're going to draw straight lines everywhere except for where that circle is. Now, when I draw my straight lines, if you have a ruler in the house, you can absolutely use that. If you don't have a ruler, do your best drawing those lines. I'm going to freehand my lines. But another cool trick you could use is if you have a spare piece of paper in your house, you can actually use the edge of that paper if you trace it really, really carefully along the edge of the paper. Or if you have a lot of paper to spare, you can actually fold it up a lot of times and make yourself a little paper ruler to use for a straight edge for straight lines. I'm actually starting to run low on paper in my house. I don't want to go out to the store unnecessarily, so I'm going to set that one aside. I'm going to make sure I'm using both sides of all of my papers, but I'm going to freehand my straight lines. Now they could go straight up and down if I'd like them to. They could go diagonally. I think I'm going to do diagonal for mine. So I'm going to start over here, and I'm just going to draw some straightish lines. I'm freehanding them. Just a pattern of straight lines. Now these lines, for those of you who have studied a little bit of geometry, would be considered parallel lines. That means they're traveling in the same direction, side by side, but if those lines continued forever and ever and ever, they wouldn't really touch. Now, mine aren't perfectly parallel, but you can get the gist, you can get the general idea of what I'm going for here. Now, when I got to the edge of that circle, I stopped, and then I pretended to draw that line through and then continued it on the other side of my circle. I'm going to do the same every time I touch that circle. I'm going to pretend to draw the line, and then I'm going to continue it on the other side so that we're only drawing these straight lines in the negative space. Then I'm going to do the same here, and then continue it on this side. And then once I'm past that circle, my straight, fairly parallel lines can be drawn pretty quickly for the rest of my paper. They don't have to be exactly the same distance apart, though it does help with the illusion to have a pretty regular pattern all the way through that. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. In those places where my lines stopped at the circle, I'm going to pretend that those lines are actually continuing on it, but I'm going to imagine that circle as a ball, a sphere shape, maybe even a semi-sphere, half of a sphere, sitting up here on the table. So when those lines hit, I'm going to kind of copy that curve of the circle just a little bit on this edge and then reconnect it. Now here on this line, since it's closer to the top of that big bulge I want to show, I'm going to have that curve out a little bit further. And then on this bottom line, I'm going to have it curve up in the other direction. Then you can kind of see, ooh, it looks like those lines are kind of curving up and around and then coming back down to this flat surface. Now, mine's not a huge illusion right now, but what I can do to make this a little bit more interesting is now I'm going to do parallel lines going in the opposite direction. I'm going to kind of crisscross them. My third graders might recognize this as cross-hatching, just kind of spread out. So when these lines intersect, that means when they go through each other, they're causing these little right angles. So these lines would be perpendicular for my fourth graders. I'm sure you miss all that geometry we were learning in school just before we left. So again, when I get to the edge of that circle, I'm going to stop, pretend to draw that line, and then continue it through to the other side. And I'm going to do that on all of these lines going all the way up and across in the opposite direction of my first set of parallel lines. I'm going to go all the way to the edge of my paper. And then you can see here on the circle, when those lines touch, I can do that same trick again. I'm going to kind of curve it out and reconnect. This one I'm going to curve a whole bunch, and I'm going to reconnect it down here. And then I'm going to bubble this one out just a little bit and reconnect it down here. And now, even though this is a flat piece of paper, it kind of looks like that ball is round and kind of bulging up from my flat piece of paper. It looks a little bit more three-dimensional. Now, this is a pretty good trick right now, and it's okay. But what I'm going to do next is going to really make my picture pop. It's going to make it look really, really exciting, but it's going to take some time. Now, if you do this at home, you can expect to spend maybe 10 or 15 minutes coloring this picture. I'm going to speed up my video a little bit so that you guys can see what this would look like in a very short amount of time when it's all done. Now, if you don't have a marker at home, this is a time when you might color in these squares in a checkerboard pattern with your pencil. But I'm going to do it with my marker and see if I can really get this to pop. So that was a really fast version of how to draw this particular optical illusion. Now you can see I was in a little bit of a hurry and it looks like my marker bled into the paper a little bit. But even though those lines are a little squiggly, you can still get the overall effect that there's a sphere, there's that three-dimensional shape kind of popping up from my page. Looks like I missed a couple of little corners here while I was going so fast. But now I want to show you another optical illusion. Now you don't have to do both of these, obviously, but if you'd like to challenge yourself and try one that's a little bit different, this is actually my favorite one to draw. Let me move this guy out of the way and get a new piece of paper here. Now this optical illusion is going to make my paper look like almost like folds of cloth. It's a really wavy illusion. It's a really neat one to do. And we're going to start out just by putting a little dot somewhere in the middle of your paper. It doesn't have to be dead center. It could be off to the side a little bit. But what we want to do coming out from that dot is I'm going to draw some curved lines spiraling out to the edges of my page. So I'm going to start here and just have a nice little curve. And I'll do another one here. I want to try to get, I don't know, maybe 5 or 8 or even 10 of these curved lines. I don't want to make too many because that's going to end up being a lot of work for me later on down the line, but I do want to have enough of them to show the illusion. So I would say maybe between 5 and 10 of these, a little closer to 10 if you can. But you don't want to go much more than that or it's going to end up being a lot of work. So I have this very cool spiral kind of pattern. Already, this is a very interesting looking picture, and there are a lot of things I could do with this. I ended up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines, which is perfect. That's right about where I wanted it. Now, we're going to start giving this kind of a three-dimensional look, kind of a fluid folded paper look by drawing what are called concentric lines. That are lines that kind of curve and will make these appear to be going down into this little hole or coming back up from it. And here's what I mean. I'm going to draw some nice curved lines, almost like rainbows, going from line to line just in this one pointed shape here. So I'm going to draw another nice high curved line and then a curved line. And then maybe I can squeeze one more tiny one in there. Now, if this pattern was continuing all the way down, I would have a little bit of a curve peeking out here and then sliding into the edge of that line. And even looking at this, now it kind of looks like this shape is bumping up, kind of curving up as it's being swirled down here into the middle, kind of like the middle of the Milky Way galaxy, that black hole that's sucking all those stars into it. But then when I get to this next shape, I'm actually going to have my curves going in the opposite direction. Instead of curving upwards like a rainbow, I'm actually going to curve downwards, almost like a letter U. So I'm actually going to turn my page a little bit, and I'm going to start every time one of these first curved lines touches, I'm going to continue it by curving downward like that. And then I'm going to do that every time one of these lines touches the edge of these two shapes. I'm going to curve it down and up like that, and then curve it down. And then same with this one. I'm even going to curve it all the way down like this. Maybe there'd be a little bit of another curved shape peeking up right here. So then, if you can see kind of what I'm doing here, you might guess that our next set of curved lines are going to be curving up, making them kind of look like they're flowing back down in this direction. So I'm going to curve a line up like this, up like this, like this, like this. And once you get into the flow of it, you'll find that it goes a little bit faster. My next set is going to be curving downward, like this, And each one of these, I want to make sure that curve is pretty severe. You don't want that curve just to be a little one, only curving a little bit. You don't want that line to be straight. You want it to be really, really curved. So really bend it out. Don't be afraid to make it look, pretty much like a letter U, which has a pretty sharp curve at the top of it. Or I'm sorry, at the bottom of it. This one's going to curve up like that. I'm just every other one of these kind of triangular shapes curving down. And then this next one will be my letter U's, not my rainbows, if that's an easy way to describe those. So I'm going to have a U and a U and a U and a U. And then on this side, we're going to do those rainbow shapes, rainbow up, rainbow up, rainbow up, rainbow up, rainbow up. And then my last one, ooh, that worked out perfectly, where this one's going to curve down, this one's going to curve down, this one's going to curve down and down and down. I can even squeeze in maybe one more right here. Now already, just looking at it like that, it kind of looks three-dimensional. It looks really wavy and swirly and wiggly. Now this looks pretty good the way it is right now, but again, if you have a black marker at home, or if you have two colored markers that are opposite colors, those complementary colors, maybe purple and yellow are a good complementary pair, red and green, or blue and orange. Those are pairs of colors that if you colored a pattern of maybe blue and then orange and then blue and then orange and then blue and then orange, and then did the opposite on that next row, you would get a really interesting effect. You'd get a really vibrant three-dimensional picture that seemed to be wiggling around. So again, I'm going to speed up the video really quickly. I'm going to color mine in with markers so you don't have to listen to me talking while I'm doing it. And then if you have the opportunity to, try out this more advanced version, take a picture of it, send it to me on Class Dojo, and then I'll let you know how you did.